Welcome to Notes 5.2, a case study of a student design. So before stepping further into statistical reasoning and scientific method, I want to step back and kind of create a fictitious scenario of now a student who wants to design a research project and see what they can learn. So if you remember from the start of the course, it had two main goals of one being the science literacy. How could you interpret scientific related materials and maybe give them feedback on how to improve it, what's good and bad, and so forth, and even just general news articles. How are you understanding them and what can you pull out from it? The other side of it is that we'll get to trying to innovate and design something around augmented reality and virtual reality, which you may know nothing about, but we can start using maybe the scientific method as a way to start researching and giving us a logical, sequential kind of procedure to follow to start learning that may not be perfect in the beginning, but by the end we would have learned a lot that we can now start innovating and building off of that. So that's what this case study is going to act like, is that we are going to look at students' a little bit of experience and how they go about designing their project. And this will kind of sum up a lot of what we've been talking about so far. So this is part one of that study. And as we go through new material within the course, I will come back to this case study and we'll expand upon it as they develop and grow their overall project. So as usual, I will shrink down to the side and we will begin. So case one. So again, remember that this is just like a scenario. You want to think this is a younger student who has an interest in a question. They have a basic understanding of science from what they've experienced in high school, and they've gone through GNED 1103 with, say, a weird face tattooed teacher already. And like they have a feeling like, okay, they have an understanding, they feel a little bit more comfortable, they know that they're not perfect, but they want to build upon this. And they've just hit with an interesting question of how does age affect color preference? And if we want to build upon their background, maybe they're in something like interior design, where they feel that this could come into play for them. And so they're like, okay, color choices, how they're going to design materials, what do they choose, and maybe when they look at different demographics, why certain color preferences may be required. Who knows? First up, but they just have a question and they want to build upon this. They know that their study will not be perfect. They don't have years of this experience in doing this research yet. But they want to get hands-on. They like working hands-on with stuff, and they feel, okay, even if I make mistakes as I go, I'll learn. I'll learn from it, and I become better the next time I do these things. And so it'll help improve their skills in relation to science and innovating, and just get some hands-on knowledge with this topic and grow from there. They also know that their study will not answer every aspect of this question of how does age affect color preference, but they possibly want to help add to the knowledge around this topic. Because interesting, that could be one topic, but there's a lot of hypotheses or predictions that people could make in relation to that, and then start building up a wealth of knowledge around, say, age and color preference, and maybe digging down to more specific questions. So they just want to see, like, hey, how could they give back and add to that overall knowledge of what's known, and maybe progress things forwards, or just make people question stuff in a different way. So, by them going through GNED 1103 with said teacher, they've seen this chart before. They know that this is the general idea of the scientific method, and so they're going to follow it. They don't know how well to do this process and procedure and everything that's in there, but they're like, okay, well, I've got a procedure and some steps, and I know I want to get to a final argument of that first question of, like, how does age affect color preference, so that first top step, and then how that will work as they step through everything and work their way down to communicating the results and answers and building up their logical argument. So they're going to follow this procedure step by step and do the best that they can, document stuff, and then present it at the end, and then maybe get some feedback of how they can improve it and maybe what they learned as they go through it. So this case study right now for part 1 is not going to go through every single step. It's going to concentrate on the asking questions, doing background research, and then finally constructing a hypothesis and gathering maybe a little bit of precursory data before they go into things of like setting up the experiment procedure, running it, collecting the data, and doing the analysis. That'll come in future case studies when we expand upon this one. And they know that everything at this point in time is like looking at cause and effect relationships, that it's built into that original question they asked. They know that as part of their logical argument, where they're using deductive, inductive, and abductive reasoning, they've also got to work into how they're trying to establish causality beyond just a basic correlation in that first step. And they know that, okay, well, so far the way they can do that is those 3 steps for establishing causality of association, direction of influence, or that temporal factor, and that non-spuriousness. They don't feel super comfortable with knowing how to do that yet, but they're just going to remember that, okay, well, I need to try to at least address that, and then go from there. And maybe the next time they study, they'll get better. So within these first 3 steps, they know they're going to have to deal with somehow with showing the association and also trying to get a correlation set up in some way. And they know that that can be done statistically with numbers or data, or by looking at other previous research and seeing what else has been done and making references to it to see that there has been an association shown already. And they also need to deal with the direction of influence, but they have a feel that they can kind of already answer that, kind of the logical way stuff is set up. So this is where they're going to begin. Just go from there. So A, ask a question. How does age affect color preference? So the nice thing about that is it already does kind of have a built-in cause and effect. But possible reasons, if we're looking for functional reasons in the end, well, one, maybe it's just general curiosity. I think sometimes it's fun just to research something. Maybe there's not something financial or other goals that come out of it, but just by researching something, you learn something new, think differently, and then after that, think about, okay, well, how could this be used in whatever way I'm just going for? Maybe it's around designing materials for people of different age groups. So if this is interior design with gerontology, thrown into that, of that study of age and aging and designing of spaces for people who are older, maybe that's important, or people who are younger, and so different age groups and looking for your target demographics. Maybe it's marketing decisions. Who knows? Stuff like this affects. So they got a reason to begin with this. They have a general question. They're just going to go with it in the beginning. Maybe it'll be refined. Depends what they learn as they go through all of this. And so looking into that question, we have to make sure, again, if this is a question that works nicely with science, we've at least got to have a cause and effect that's built into that question. That's that backbone of everything that we are doing. So possible cause and effect they're seeing here? Well, cause, age, leading to being the effect, their color preference. So they've got that. They know that in the beginning. They know, well, it's probably going to lead to independent, dependent variables from there. But they really know, okay, well, the other backbone of everything in science is that empirical evidence, that measurable evidence that you can gather for the variables that's then also can be backed up by someone else. That if they agree upon the way that you're measuring it, someone else can reproduce this, take similar measurements, and should come back to the similar results. And so they need to deal with, okay, well, I've got age and a color preference, and they've got to decide, well, how are they going to measure these things? Age, simple, like number already, what age are they? But how do you quantify color preference, and what issues are there related around that? And is there a commonly accepted method, or at least method names, if we go to communicate this with other people, that they can also look up and find, okay, this is commonly used when doing these types of studies? They don't know. We need to quantify those both. So good, we got cause and effect, age, color preference, and we know we need to measure that, and so we'll go from there. So here, okay, well, possible independent, dependent variables. So now that we've gone through that scientific method part 2, we need to bring in some more vocabulary, show that we know how to converse within this science culture a little bit more. So for them, they say, well, okay, again, possible independent variable being age, because independent is your cause. And so we're going to be manipulating and changing that in the experiment, and then we're going to be measuring their dependent variable, so that's the color preference. An age, we hear fine, so colors, ranking, other stuff for color preferences, some other research. Like, we'll still need to do that, but that's the next phase. We got that background research. We can figure stuff out. So we've delved a little bit deeper already from here. We had a question. We're now extracting from that question the cause and effect. And then from there, using the proper terminology, saying our independent variable, dependent variable. And we know that this ties into later phases for the scientific method. So we're good. But the bigger daunting part of stuff, this background research that we've got to do. And some of the innovation come from this is that, like, well, they don't have a lot of background with any of this themselves. And so this background research will be like them putting their toe into the water, taking that first step to learn a lot and getting some experiences. You may not know anything, but just by doing the research, you may at least learn some new key terms or get a better feel for stuff. And as you do more research, get deeper into it. And you may not feel as strong, but who knows? You never know what you'll learn as you go. But having some starting general points of where to go to get that information is very important. So they know, going through this Gen 1103 class, that, well, here's some starting points. They know they want to look through some peer-reviewed journals, conference proceedings, and science-related articles from there. Because they know, well, if they're delving into science culture, that's that last communication phase, is looking for those articles. And these are the places where they're published. They don't know what's the good qualities, like say the good people within the community to talk to, but they'll learn as they go. But they just know, okay, peer reviewed for the first step, get some feedback, and maybe as they go, they'll start learning which are the good journals to look at, which are the good conferences and relations that are backed up and have a proper peer review from there. So they want to do that. So right now they know, okay, well, they can go to scholargoogle.ca, so use the power of Google searches to go specifically through research and journals. They know definitely they can go to the library's website and talk to librarians. Mount Royal's library is excellent, not just for how it looks, but also the people who work there. Like, the everything of that system, and they're a huge guiding point of knowing how to access that information. So even through the library website, you got access to like journals, general science journals that the Mount Royal University pays for access to these journals. And if you're not sure how to begin any of this, like, they also know that they can go look for librarians that are specific to the area of research. There's two that are listed here for chemistry and physics and psychology, but there are others for computer science and whatever field you're really in. There is a librarian that you can contact for that extra help. For this case study, you're not doing that, but if you're doing in the future, even for this course, reach out to those people. They're there to help you, and if you're lost, they can really help guide you and give you access to some key information on what to do. So they also know, like, when doing this research, that they need some keywords. What are they going to be searching for when they're using these sources? And part of the background. So they kind of think of the key terms that are important from that. Maybe different spellings because of cultural stuff, and maybe different synonyms, just to think that maybe these different changing some of your keywords and including some of the synonyms in your search, maybe it'll bring up papers or other resources that you didn't expect. So for them right now, they're going with age and color for stuff, color and color, but the British versus American spelling, so, like, that could bring up different things based on the search, and they saw, like, preference and maybe looked up a few possible synonyms. I cannot say that word properly. We're just going to move past this. So, like, the fondness, taste, inclination, ups like that. So just like, if they're wanting to expand and just dig a little bit more into that, they can switch up a few keywords from there. They also know, like, already beforehand from high school and other times that, well, we got our eyes. They are the things that start interpreting that sense of color that we're getting, but they don't know enough about it, and it's been some years, so they looked up some information of, like, how do humans sense color? From right here, I know it's the eyes, But it's like, okay, they start finding information that the human eye and brain together translate light into color. So again, that's interesting. It's a combination of signals coming through the eye and then we receive, but also being combined together by the actual brain. Now, this is backed up by different biology and psychology studies. And they know that there's light receptors within the eye that transmit message to the brain, which produces the familiar sensation of color, so what we're experiencing. And that's with the human eye. And remember that other animals have different eyes and they can perceive things different than us. Cats, dogs. And like Newton observed that color is not inherent in objects. Rather, the surface of an object reflects some color and absorbs all others. So this is being more things like you say, like that apple, or if you're looking at it, it's not that the apple is actually red itself and it's in behind the material. It's the fact that the material it's made out of is that when light hits it, and light is generally made up of all spectrums of the actual color, like white light that we're seeing, and so then it absorbs some and reflects back, and what's reflecting back in left is that red, and that's what our eyes are picking up on in that part of the electromagnetic spectrum. Blah. So weirdness from right here, but well, okay, well, we know that it's coming off from a surface, and an object appears white, reflects like all wavelengths in black when it absorbs the rest of it. And between my face and clothing right now, I'm getting wide ranges of what's being reflected and absorbed. They also found that red and green and blue are the additive primary colors, so they also remember that from art classes earlier on, and they know with the spectrums that different combinations that will generate different amounts of color. And they're like, okay, well, maybe that's part of where they can start picking their colors, because there's so many colors that are out there. Maybe they know they can at least start with red, green, and blue. And maybe if there's a certain preference of one, maybe they can start designing more colors that incorporate more of that one versus others within the actual shades and tints and everything else from there. But they don't know. They're just beginning with this, and then they start learning here about like the structure internally of the eye, and they see that we got tons of these light sensors within them, and okay, they're called rods and cones. Okay, that's different types of cells, and these receptors process the light into the nerve impulses and pass them along to the cortex of the brain via the optic nerve and everything being connected. Okay, well, they know now, okay, there's different cells now. When they write and talk about this, they could incorporate some of this information to kind of show that they do have some background, at least with it, and tying to some other terms that match up to this. Okay, so rods transmit mostly black and white information to the brain. As rods are more sensitive to dim light than cones, you lose more color vision in dusky light, and your peripheral vision is less colorful. So this is good to know. So those rods are black and white, and we're seeing here, well, dim and light then will affect how you perceive the other amounts of colors. So if you're looking at red and it's dim versus looking at red when it's really bright out, that's going to change your perception of that actual color. And so that's something we need to take into account then. We know that maybe later on in the experiment procedure, we got to be careful about that if we're getting different people to make color preferences and some are looking at it when it's darker in the room versus brighter, that's already, now you have something else that's being manipulated, and it could be the real cause of someone's choice for why they like that color or not. And if you go into color theory, there's important lighting and everything else. So we know, okay, maybe we need to take that into account or use that to design stuff or change how we design things. Okay, the cones transmit the higher levels of light intensity that create the sensation of color and visual sharpness. So it's that combination then of the rods of that black and white and dimness combined with the cones for the overall signals that are then sent to the actual brain and then perceived as the colors as we understand them. Okay, here, good, some new information. This is very important. Definitely when we're dealing with any topic, worrying about like different conditions people may have and not trying to be ableist, and understanding, okay, well, about 8% of men, say 1% of women or whatever gender, have some form of color impairment. So most people with color deficiencies aren't aware that those colors they perceive are as identical appear different than other people. So that's cute, like, the red-green blindness, that some people just see it as shades of gray. And how would you know? It's any different. You grow up, you're told that thing's blue, that's your sensors, and until you talk to someone else and you can see other shades of stuff and describe things to people, and you're not really aware of that. And so here's another thing we have to worry about later on. This is dealing maybe the second part of the case study, but that non-spuriousness that, okay, well, how do we deal with individuals or sampling and knowing if they have color impairment? Because that's going to change their perception of what it is for reds and greens and so forth. And so how do they like that? Because you're like, the most common impairment is red and green. Which causes red and green to appear as like indistinguishable. So there you go. Like if we had the choices of red, green, and blue, well then red and green are going to look exactly the same to that person. So maybe we start refining that we're not working with people with impairments. That's a different kind of question that can pop up when we deal with age and color preference and age and people who have color impairments. Like, so there's new innovate. There's a whole new study and something you can deal with and something to take into account. So good. We're going so far. But now, like, that's just on the eye and that structure, but we've got to see, well, what else is happening out there? We have to, as if you're going out and talking to other people in the community, if this is science culture, and saying, well, hey, what have you heard? What have you heard about color preference and age? Have you heard anything? Can you tell me? Can you connect me with someone who knows more about that? Like, we'd like to be able to virtually walk out these people, but the amount of people we have nowadays and they're doing science, we don't always have that ability. If you do, go and talk to those people. But another way is through doing these searches for stuff in scientific journals. That's the way you're going out and talk to people with it. And so this is a result from Google Scholar, and just using the keywords age and color preference. So keeping it very general for now, and just searching for that like one. And this search here was done on May 14th in 2020. And so, okay, there's some different ones here. Age and gender, color preference, the color preference, order of different age groups. Is preference affected by age differences? Oh, good. There's some stuff that shows there's some connections. We don't know the quality of these yet and how to dig into them. We know that some other people's studies have also looked into gender as an effect of this. So maybe that's something we should take into account as well to control or to measure and see if there's a difference of how that affects it. Who knows? Or just people's general background. But they decide to look at one paper they notice here, kind of catches their eye. So changing color preference with aging comparative study. So they just kind of look deeper into that one and see what they start finding and start looking at the paper. So the overall title they find for this one is Changing Color Preference with Aging, a comparative study on younger and older native Germans from years 19 to 90 years old. And you got the citation here and a link to this one. I noticed this paper, unfortunately, Mount Royal doesn't have a license for it. You have to pay for it individually. And so I decided I would pay for this paper to dig deeper into it and include it in for this course. But when they're looking at this, they're like, okay, well, they can understand some terms, but there's things like comparative study. I don't know what that is. Like what is that? So maybe there's another term they need to search for that and see what is a comparative study and get some definitions for it. And it says here younger and older, and this is just for German. So like, well, the geographical location of this information is more sampling around German. So like maybe this is somewhere they can add in, oh, hey, maybe I can do it with my community, and then we can see and compare to what's been done in this study and kind of build up from there. Who knows? But they still need to also look at like, what do they mean here by younger and older in this study and dig deeper. So let's take that first word, though, comparative study, and let's do a quick search and see what pops up. And here's one definition. So comparative study is used to determine and quantify relationships between two or more variables by observing different groups that either by choice or circumstance is exposed to different treatments. So a comparative study looks at two or more similar groups, individuals, or conditions by comparing them. Okay, so this is just groups, meaning that they're comparing that maybe where they do have something or they don't. And comparing, like say you took the pill or they didn't take the pill, medical related, and seeing, okay, well, what's happening? And you're like, okay, well, this is good. That kind of sounds what we're looking for. We're looking between different age groups. So really our different groups could be different age groups and comparing between what is younger to what is older from there and doing that study. And well, we don't know a lot about it yet, but we know, hey, there's this thing called comparative study, and I can probably do some research on that further, and that could be really useful maybe later on in the design of my experiment procedure, that I can look up comparative studies and generally how they do them, and I can relate back to that and say, oh, I'm doing a comparative study. And I can use the vocabulary that other people would understand, and they could maybe say, hey, that's a good way to do the study. That's a good tool to use, or maybe this is a better one. And I can use comparative study as a keyword to search that out and search more about, well, how do I go about doing that procedure? How do I go through following that? And it's something you should expect for a lot of science, that sequential, logical, scientific reasoning, that there's probably other procedures that people have in place. So I should be able to dig my way back from that. So the actual paper itself, we're going to go through some summary and looking deeper into it. So what do they find? Background. Previous studies have shown that color preference changed from early childhood to adulthood. Oh, we should probably look at those papers within the citations they talk about. That's some really good one. That's talking about previous studies, and that's leading towards kind of a correlation between the two. You can still see that age and color preference, and they're saying childhood to adulthood. And so there is an association already from there. So we should see, well, what references do they have? And we should probably look at those papers and keep those references, because we could also use those once we understand what's in there and maybe do more research and add on to that. So the objective of their study was to assess whether color preference undergo further changes during adulthood. So the previous studies they've seen said they did between child to adults. And so now I want to see, does this happen even more further with adulthood, when it's just not just, say, someone being older my age to when you get older and older, does that keep changing? Which could be valuable for that gerontology of looking at elderly individuals and what happens from there. So that's objectives. So now they start talking about their methods. And be aware that methods is a key term. Methods mean how they're going to go about sampling the data. Where do they get it from? How do they gather that? Methods or methodology is the science or research terms, not just science. This also goes into social sciences and quantitative and qualitative research. But methods of how you're gathering the data and how you go about doing that overall research. And so overall here, I'm not going to go through every step from this, but they're noticing, you can see a little bit of the quantification of what they're doing, that they're saying, okay, well, how many people did they include? They can't do everyone in Germany within there, but they did a sample. They said the ranges they did this. They said the location where it was from. And based upon splitting it by male, female, to others, they're kind of giving a descriptive of, well, this is where they got it from. This is where you can pull information from. And then you can if you're doing your own study, try to compare the same thing, compare between the two. So here they'll said the subgroups were compared for the most and least preferred colors that they had chosen by name out of 4 given colors. So you can see here they've included blue, green, red, yellow. So, well, maybe if we want to build upon what they're doing, we could also choose those as the starting colors that we work with. And they're saying something about here of least preferred colors, most and least preferred. So it's interesting, maybe something else we can do. Differences in the patterns of frequencies between sexes and age groups were assessed for statistical significance using chi-squared or chi-squared analysis. And they have no clue. They don't know what that is, but they know that vocabulary is important and they probably have to grow upon this. So they've remembered, okay, instead of just quickly glossing over that term statistical significance and chi-square, they're like, well, what are these? Now be aware, statistical significance, we will go into this course. It's a very important thing for science. But they'll look it up themselves here, but they also see the chi-squared thing analysis, and they know this is with the data. So this is probably something where they're talking about after their experiment procedure, and they've gathered their empirical evidence, and they're doing the analysis to accept or reject the hypothesis. And so maybe this is something to deal with stats, which we'll cover next, and we're not going to go too deep, but they know chi-square is there. So well, that's a tool. That's a tool they used here. So maybe it's a tool they should use as well. And they should learn more about it, possibly. They don't know anything about it now. And you can see here them talking about their results. I'm definitely not going to go into this. And I just included this and had some highlights that you can see, well, weird ways that they quantify stuff and other symbols that may be esoteric. When they say p less than 0.001 and being important. And this is something where if you're not sure, then you have to start searching, saying science and p. What is that, like p-value? And this is something that is important. It deals with probability and chance and stuff. And we're not going to go too deep into this in this course. You can do it in other courses for what it is. But I'm including this little snapshots. They will, when they're analyzing it, how they're quantifying that. And sometimes there's specific vocabulary they need to expand upon. And so when they see that, it means something important for that culture. That p less than 0.001 is also a way of saying, well, geez, this is actually important, not just happens. It's not what you think random. This means that for that to happen, it's a very, very small chance for it to be anything but what you're looking at based upon the actual data. So digging deeper. So I've included a kind of definition here so that you're aware of it, but don't feel that you have to go deep with this or be scared away by it or have to understand everything perfectly. It's just to know that something called a p-value exists. It's a new term you can include in your vocabulary and use it to play around and maybe research more about it and over time maybe get stronger from it. But p-value is a statistical tool calculated from the data. So all the data that's collected, it's a number that comes out. So same thing as kind of calculating the mean or average. Taking a bunch of data and you get one number that then has properties that you can tell things about that data. And the p-value tells us whether an observation is a result of a change that was made or the result of random occurrences. So remember that we're looking at the independent to dependent variable. And so we're manipulating the independent variable and measuring manipulating the independent variable and measuring the dependent variable and seeing if there's any changes from here. And so this p-value is really a way from that data that we're getting to calculate, was it just random chances that when I made those changes that this happened, or was it like, no, there's such a small probability that it was anything else than me making that change that actually caused it. So when talking about p-value, it's really important for that analysis phase later on. We won't directly do that, of course. We'll address it in a different way because we don't have time to go so deep into statistics. I just want people to get a feel for it later on. So they know that's there, and they're okay, and they're like, okay, this is the student now. They're looking at the paper, concludes the results suggest that color preferences change during the course of the adult lifespan. These changes seem to be revealed at the trend reported to the literature. So this is showing that, well, they're tying back, and they're saying, well, okay, based on their analysis and what they've done, that this shows that, yes, there was the previous association of showing child to adulthood, but now from adulthood to even older, that this trend does actually continue. And they give some other reasons that it may be dealing with color discrimination or visual imagery, the yellowing of the lenses and what we see within our eyes, and the decreased function of the blue cones and mechanisms in aging. So all these things that can affect the eyes. So, as you get older, that your eyes will be affected and how you perceive stuff will be different. So maybe designing stuff around there will become important. So they're like, the students feeling good. They found one paper and they're learning a lot from this. There's a lot that they don't know and it's scary with the overall paper, but they found like a few interesting things. And they've also gone through and highlighted and made notes of some key stuff that they can start using. You can see the actual paper here. Like when they learned about the term gerontology. You can see up on top, they saw this here and they're like, okay, well, what's that? And I looked up, and that study of people that are aging, and they're like, aging. I'm like, oh, good. They can see this is actually overall behavioral sciences journal. They have a whole new term for this field. They feel good because they can take that keyword. Now they can know targeting specifically more journals to look at. They've seen here that okay, well, this is a little bit older of a paper. That it was published basically back in February 1st in 2001. And so you're like, okay, well, this is good. It's 19 years. It's not insanely old, but it's not the newest that's out there. So I like this paper. They maybe should look for newer papers also on this topic to see how other things have changed. But they're like, hey, this is still good and it's a beginning point. They can see some of the keywords they have here. For their overall study, but they start reading through it and they understand the methods and they start noticing things like, oh, hey, here, they see quotes, they say color preferences in humans have been investigated through two main methodological approaches. And they know here that methodological means how do they measure this? So how do they measure something and the methods of gathering the actual data? And they see here that they're talking about by presenting color stimuli and by using color names. So these are two different ways that this author is saying that it's been used in other studies. basically how they're measuring their dependent variable. And they're saying that, well, this has been done. There's two ways of actually doing this. They talk about some other ones here, but they give some references here. So this 1 to 7, some other papers. That's a good point. They're backing up, okay, well, they've done some research to see how stuff has been done in a few other studies and how they've been quantifying and measuring that. And they've commonly used the name color stimuli and color names. And this is something then that we can then go research more. We can see how those papers and other people have actually established that. And we have some new keywords to build from. And we also have some other papers that we can read ourselves, then possibly cite some of them to back up why we're using a specific method to quantify or measure the actual color preference itself. Okay, they also say the majority of studies on color preference show that applying both the color stimuli method and the color name method, that adults prefer the color blue. So they just go into here, but there's some more papers. We just know that there's some more papers and these kind of references. And so in the very beginning, so something to back up. Okay, and there's some other key things they find. Okay, previous research has also shown that color preferences change from early childhood to adulthood. And so they got some citations, so we should probably read those. This is important to say, is there a difference of how age affects this? And you can see the beginnings that we're seeing of the association. Like, how are we going to back up that there's actually an association between them? And we can see, well, that's what they're doing here. That's what they're doing in this first paper. They're talking about the two things and these two events of age and preference, and they found other ones that are similar, being childhood and adulthood, so all different ages, and showing an association between them. So, okay, they're good. And they're like, well, my study's not too new now. Some other people have already done this, so maybe there's inklings here that the question they started with is just a little bit too general. Maybe they need to make it more specific because they're seeing, oh, there's already work that's been out here. So you're like, okay, well, if I'm going to innovate, well, how do I change and innovate and show that something I'm doing is new or going to be used in a different way? So I got those other papers they can look into. They find other things like the question arises whether color preferences undergo further changes. Okay, well, that's what they're wanting in this paper. So does it from further adulthood? And a review of the literature has shown that the majority of studies that assessed color preferences in adults had been limited to young and middle-aged, whereas studies centering on elderly subjects, or a few. So, like, you can see, like, so what they're doing here in this paper, it's not just the association. They're still backing up. They said they've done a literature review. They see there's association, but they're also explaining the gap that they found. So the knowledge gap. So what's new about what they're doing at all? And based upon their review, they're seeing, well, middle age from here, and there's not as much for the elderly. So the new thing that they're adding to that knowledge base around age and color preferences, looking specifically at elderly and seeing how is this actually done. Okay, so in view of increasing proportion of elderly people in the Western and other populations, studies have shown that older men and women often experience difficulty in carrying out tasks that depend upon visual functions, for example, color discrimination, like anything else from here measured. So, like, overall, like, this is still saying, well, why? They're expanding that, like, well, okay, they're seeing that association from elderly in this age color, and then issues of what could, like, problems that people have then with this, and why their study, if they can figure out which color preferences are from there, then that could lead to other designs of stuff. Like they even mention here, moreover, color plays an important role in food choice by influencing taste thresholds. So just let alone with the color and food and how you perceive it and you like it, if that's changing, maybe that's something else needs taken out for design for elderly, or what happens, or things like art therapy or anything else. So they're just kind of also showing the usefulness of maybe the knowledge that they're adding into this. And so overall now they're getting now deeper into what they say for their own study. The objective of the study was to evaluate the effect of aging on color preference in a larger sample of adult native Germans aged 19 to 90 years, employing the color name method. So you can even see they're getting into that's almost that hypothesis, prediction, almost phase of the cause and effect, and making it more narrow instead of being just age and preference. They're more specifically saying where it comes from and what group it's being done, and even here saying how they're going to measure, employing the color name method. And they mentioned it, but they've already previously cited that, okay, well, this is why you have these methods and how they're being used and building up from there. And since color preference is not such a common everyday kind of measurement, they want to back up where is that coming from and why they're using that. They also expand here, say that the advantage of the color name method is that it is well suited for epidemiological studies. I know I said that wrong. In contrast to the color stimuli method that requires special equipment and research circumstances. So that's an important thing. We already see between the two methods, which we can dig into, is that color stimuli is going to need special equipment. Like, the rods in our eye, as we said, for dim to bright, that could affect it. So if we're going to make them choice colors, and the stimuli being that we're giving them the actual color, like a swab of it, you're going to have to know specifically the color tones and the rooms that setup, and it's going to take more work. And so they, here in this study, instead just use the actual names as that, of do you like red, green, or blue, and people can then go back to their own memory of what they associate with that color and their preference. And it's also something that's probably good for the student themselves here, that they feel they're like, I don't have a lot of equipment. I don't, I'm not going to be able to make these special setups, but I can definitely just say a color name. So for them, what resources they have access to is probably a good thing they'll do as well. So we can in here that this study aims at determining which colors older adults prefer and to what extent they differ in their color preferences from younger adults. The study was designed to investigate relatively healthy, mobile, and independently living elderly, because most existing studies were based on elderly persons living in nursing homes or geriatric patients. So they can even say here, like, what they're expanding upon, what they're looking at specifically, and who they're sampling it from, and say how they're adding on to what wasn't there before. And this is going to be important when they're talking about where they're sampling, where they're getting it from, and when you're interpreting this study, how can you take information from that and compare it to others and see what's new. So also good. So again, within their methods itself, so again, how they went about doing to gather their data, so something to be important as part of the empirical procedure you follow. So our methods are methodology, so another terms for that. Color preference were assessed by name, so we know that the color name method. The subjects were given sheets of paper on which the names of the 4 colors, so blue, green, red, and yellow. So they even said how they were giving it, so they're being more specific. So this is something we should take into account in our experiment procedure, that we should probably state how we're doing that, because someone else has got to reproduce this. Like, was it, if you didn't state this as a piece of paper with the names, was it a researcher was saying, do you like red, green, or blue? That's one way to collect it. But here they're saying, okay, they were given sheets of paper, and then they were able to pick from there. So then men and women were asked to select their most preferred and their least preferred colors out of the 4 given. The most and least preferred colors of the younger and older adults were compared in a cross-sectional study. So once again, we got something here. We know it's study, but we don't know what a cross-sectional study is. But they know here that they're comparing 2 groups, that they've kind of separated people to sample what they say is younger or older. They haven't defined yet what is younger or older. We'll have to see if that's later on within the actual paper. And we're saying, and then we know that they were given it on the names on paper, so you can see how they're being more specific and not leaving it so vague. So in our experiment procedure, if we're going to go with a color name, we may have to do something similar from this. If we don't know anything better, we this is the only study they've read so far on this, so maybe they'll just mimic and do some of similar stuff, and then see, once they read other papers, they'll grow. But at least they know a lot more now that they've dug into this paper itself. But before they go on, they want to know, they knew that comparative study was important to look at definitions. They really want to look at, now, what is a cross-sectional study design? Looking at the paper more, they see some tables, and they start noticing younger adults and older adults, and they see some ranges. They see some other terms they don't know enough yet, like that plus, minus, and other things, and what is SD, and all this kind of stuff. But the kind of vague stuff, remembering that from the scientific reasoning notes, which will be coming next for you. And so they see here, like, okay, well, younger adults really, even though I'm saying men to women, it seems to be the lowest age is 19 and highest age is 44. So based upon this, we kind of go, well, maybe the paper was saying that the term younger is defined by anyone between 19 to 44. And then older adults, it says here 55 to 90, but we can probably say, or maybe 52, that it was probably like 45, because these are just the age ranges of who they actually included within the studies. Don't know how they picked that sample yet, but it's probably proportional or related to the people who was willing to volunteer to what are the demographics of the Munich in Germany. But looking up cross-sectional study design, they find the definition that a cross-sectional study design is a type of observational study design. In a cross-sectional design study, the investigator measures the outcome and the exposure of the study participants at the same time. So that means if there's different groups that are getting this, like the pill or not getting the pill, they're both being done in the same year. It's not like a previous study where there's previous data that was gathered. You're gathering new and then you're comparing your data to that one. So they're giving the effect that, okay, well, both of them are compared now. Which can be another important control thing, because if we say someone's color preferences, which can be also impacted by people's lived experiences, then different time periods, if we said who's younger 19 to this and did it years ago versus the elderly now, it's all going to start screwing stuff up. So they can see here, well, cross-sectional allows okay, we do it to both of them at that same time and then comparing the two of them together. So it probably leads down to that comparative and cross-sectional study is probably going to work with this, because we're going to be working with people and doing the same thing. So they probably have to look into, again, cross-sectional study design and see what is the procedure for that. How have other people done that? So here, yeah, see the risk factors. I won't go through this. We've already talked about that in the previous slides. So they just keep digging deeper, and they know, okay, they reached later in the paper, so after the methods section, so being their experiment procedure, they're going into the analysis phase. So once something that they've done and gathered the actual data. And so that's where we can see the statistical analysis. Now from here, we don't need to go deeper into this. This is, maybe we start learning they mentioned some software here, like SPSS and all the others. And so maybe that's something we look into, because we don't want to manually calculate this, but there's probably software tools out there that we can plug in data and then say, hey, I want the chi-squared analysis, or I want everything else coming out of this. And so maybe we need to look into those similar ones from there. Maybe we'll use them, or we'll just use Excel, whatever we have access to. And we see again that term statistical significance pop up and all the rest of it. So we'll just keep that in the back of our heads now until we learn more and just accept, well, I don't really know it yet, but we know maybe this is something that's important or I should deal with, or maybe acknowledge that I don't know how to do it yet and just do something else for right now when we reach our analysis phase. And we go through here of the chi-square test. I just want to include a definition. And the chi-square test is intended to test how likely it is that an observed distribution is due to chance. So it's also called a goodness of fit statistics, because it measures how well the observed distribution of data fits with the distribution that is expected if the variables are independent. So this is kind of like that p-value stuff again from here, saying is how much it relates to. We will not be going deeper into this. Don't feel scared off about this. I just want you to know, well, the term exists and you can start digging deeper into that and learning more from there if you need to. And then lastly, all papers at the end that you'll be forced to, and why it's important for these references is this is who's the other people to talk to. So if we thought of this paper as being as if equivalent analogy of going out to the community, and we found one person and we talked and heard about their stories of what they did for this study, and they would have talked in reference to a lot of other people you go talk to. Well, that's what the reference section here is for, is these are all the other people they've guided you to go and research. And so you can see some of them they found before for the name, methods, and what they're using, and others, and some key highlighted. Maybe others are important, but we're okay, well, I can probably go talk to those people. I can read those papers and dig deeper into it. Maybe I'll learn more. And then maybe I can start doing some other research. So these reference sections are really important when you're trying to dig deeper. And right now we've hit the end of one paper and we've gotten a lot more information than we ever knew before, and the students feeling a little bit better, and they're backing this up, and they know within their argument that they're going to keep this evidence and kind of document and talk about it at the end. And so after this, they want to keep going. One paper is not good enough. They need to look at more and get a better feel. They need to talk to more people and get more answers, basically. And so they want to do more of a review. And this time they decide, okay, let's go with literature review. We know that that's important. That's basically equivalent of going to someone who's talked to a lot of people, and they've kind of summarized. So I can talk to that one person, and they've summarized and talked to a lot of other people. So that's what a literature review is. And so they use Google Scholar. They use the keyword literature review first and then saying color preference. They just go for general, any kind of literature reviews that talk about color preferences, because that could also help them learn more about things that could possibly affect color preferences and things they should probably take into account in their study. And the results of this search were done again on May 14th, 2020. So you'll probably get different things if you do it yourself. And so here in Google, they get Google Scholar, they get some new things popping up, but they got some nice stuff like over here on the left-hand side. They can actually start filtering, saying since 2000, since 2020, 2019, 2016. And they also have ways of sorting by date. So we saw in that previous one, that was 2001 is maybe not so recent. So maybe we can start saying, okay, well, what is more recent? Maybe we should go with something closer to 2020, because if you're doing literature reviews, they've probably brought everything that's newer to older together for us. For example, this very first one, color preference of online consumers across cultural perspective. Maybe that could be interesting. I don't know the journals and stuff, and this seems related to marketing. We can see it says here that's 2018. So this is good. There's maybe a potential here. And we have over here other cases saying where we can access the PDFs and stuff from. And be aware that some of these maybe you have to pay to get access to. But most times if you're on Mount Royal campus, or if you link to it and they say if you have to log in, you may be able to log in with your MyRMU credentials if they ask for university, and it takes you to the MyRMU page and takes you back, and then you could get access to these. If nothing else, even here at the bottom, they're suggesting related searches. So these are maybe new key terms you didn't know before, new things that you could look stuff up from there. Other research they could do, we're not digging deeper into that right now. I only wanted to go through one paper, but let's do another search. And now instead of just color preferences, they do another literature review search for age and color preference, and see what pops specifically from that. And you can see here again, we do another search and we see things like age effects on color, emotion, preference, and harmony. Sounds good to me. That's 2012. Ethnic identification and preference review. Interesting. Landscape and design of park user preference. Who knows? Tooth color, a review of the literature. I don't know why that fascinates me every time I see it, but bores me. When I did the first search, seeing tooth color. They're like, well, that's important for me. Tooth color review of literature, many factors associated with tooth discoloration and staining. But it's probably going in dentistry. I just had to stop, and this is totally a diversion, because I'm like, it totally seems like something that would put me to sleep while reading it, yet something in my brain makes me want to go look that up. I don't know why. But that's your teacher being weird. We'll move on from there. But we'll probably want to keep searching for more from this. This is only the first page. There's others that we want to find. We see other things here, like other related searches, like aged individual color preferences, children color preferences, evaluation of color preferences. You're like, okay, well, this is excellent. This is giving us lots of other stuff we can start researching and building off of there from the very beginning, and using these tools to help us, and kind of from one keyword to the next and building up from there. So more research needs to be done. We need to build up that background, do some reading. It's that kind of heavy work in the very beginning, especially if we don't have a lot of experience. So if I don't know, you ask a lot of other people and you go from there, and you stop at some point in time when you're starting to feel comfortable enough with it. Because right now we don't know the exact point, but if we don't, we're like, okay, well, I think I'm ready to proceed. And so in this example, we only went through one paper in depth, but you would do similar stuff of reading through it, looking for terms, building up from there, building your knowledge, even if some of the papers are confusing, and starting to grow with what you know. So for us, in this case study, just assume with that student that they've read through more papers and built up more of an actual background before they've moved on with this. So we're like, hey, well, we've done step one of asking a question and learned a lot about that. We did some background research and learned about the eye. We looked at one paper in depth, and we learned a lot more from that about how to measure and do other stuff, and connected us to other terms of maybe possible ways we can design, and connected us with other papers to actually read. And so we still need to go on to doing things like constructing hypothesis, but definitely also trying to think, well, how are we going to deal with answering those steps of an association and direction of influence that have to come before we continue on with anything else? And how are we going to back that up? So observations the student made that, well, previous research does show an association / correlation between age and color preference. So that's a good thing. So we've got an association that builds into our question. We don't have anything right now where we're doing it with statistical numbers. If we cared about that, maybe we can go back and do searches for meta-analysis and other data from those studies if we felt that that's the way that we want to back it up from here. Because remember, meta-analysis are kind of like literature reviews, but they're combining the data from multiple kind of sources together and comparing that. And so here they're like, okay, well, yeah, I've got some papers I've already read, and I've got that one that we had originally, so I'm probably keep those and cite that, and I'll talk about that earlier on in the paper to build up the argument of why this is important and how they're connected together. They can see here they've also learned that there are many factors that could affect color preferences. They'll have to take this into account during the experiment phase, so experiment procedure, your methodology, set everything up, and probably maybe have to start with being constant variables, because that's kind of what we've learned so far about the non-spuriousness, is that constants can kind of help these spurious cases of other things that could be affecting it. Kind of like, health, geographic location, racial backgrounds, etc. What they would have learned from their background research. Now, right now, they know that maybe they're not going to be able to stop everything. They'll do their best, but they'll just stop and say, okay, well, this is what I feel could be affecting for, and make it clear what you took into account, and these are your assumptions, and then go forwards with that. And when someone else looked at the argument, they could say, well, maybe you missed this, or these were good, and then you could evolve and change from there. But this is what they've learned so far. Dealing with the direction of influence, this is kind of a logical conclusion one. This is not one where you need to show which one was first, like temporally. It's like, well, logical to have, but you have to have a specific age first before making the choice of your color preference. Like, it's not the color preference is making your age. Or not, who knows. But from here, like, no, it's a logical thing. You're like, no, first I'm this per age, and then I say what my color preference is. And so the direction of influence is kind of implied. You could say it in your write-up, but this is kind of an implied case. You feel this. So they not feeling so secure themselves there, even though it seems implied, they're just going to state it directly later on in their actual study. They need to include different age groups within the actual study. They've seen what was done from the other studies. They know this is important, not just one area. They need to know younger to older, and what do they define that as. And probably should do a cross-sectional study design as well. So asking different age groups, but the survey is done in the year 2020 now. So all of them, so they're asking these groups, but they're all doing it within the same year to do the study. They're not like doing this, like getting data from 2010 and comparing 2020. They want to keep it to that. They don't know a lot about cross-sectional study designs. So they're probably going to have to research that more and do some more background research before they design their experimental procedure. Most of the studies seem to stick with the colors red, green, and blue, and yellow. They decide at a bare minimum to also include these colors in their study. So you could go somewhere else, but they're just deciding, okay, I'm not sure what to do. There's so many different colors you could go, but I'm going to include these because at least then it could also be compared to those other studies and what they found. Quantifying color preferences. In some studies, it was done by having the individuals either numerically rank the colors from least liked to most liked, or just picking them. So they need to decide, do they have them, if we're using these 4 colors, to rank from 1 to 4, how they would rank them, or just least or most, and what's most important for them. They're not sure, so they may just pick one or the other. Color stimuli and color names, so there are ways of quantifying it. It's not something that they're making up, that there are other papers and researchers that have used that same terminology, and they can also reference back to where they're getting that from, and they kind of decide that maybe the color name, again, is the best because color stimuli requires specialty equipment that they just don't feel they have the time or ability to set up for right now. But it means that maybe future studies need to be done with color stimuli, and that's what other people could innovate and build off of that. So they also do realize after doing all this research that, again, their question, like they realized earlier on that it's a little bit too general, that they need to like maybe make it more specific, because that question of like age and color preferences, they can see that there's a lot of other studies that were done so far for that, but then they realize there's a lot of different questions that can be done. Like some of those were narrowed to one little area, and they could maybe narrow it down to an area they're aware of, and then add that to the pool of knowledge that's out there and build upon it. And so they decided to refine the original question based upon this, and also the fact that they're still going to school at Mount Royal. So if they're going to collect data or do this, they'll just kind of maybe look, oh, how does it happen at Mount Royal? They want their study to act like a comparative study and add to the knowledge, and they hope that their study could help contribute to future studies. You never know, and maybe it's around designing educational material at Mount Royal. They hope to have an impact. And they know maybe it's not going to ever really happen, but they're like, whatever, I've asked a question, and they've hit this point, they've already learned a lot more and engaged with stuff, and they're interested in gerontology. They like the idea of this age and color and realize that it has a bigger impact than they thought, even like food choices and how people do their tasks when they get older and that designing. So they're like, oh, this is interesting, if nothing else, just for myself to learn from this. But if possible, I could provide something else, someone else reads this and they can make different decisions backing that up. So when they look at their original question, they know, like, they don't feel confident about asking the questions or hypothesis, but they're just like, well, whatever, ask a question, let's go from there, and it'll grow. And they started with, how does age affect color preference? And based upon the background research, they decide before doing that that they're going to switch it around to being, how does the age of a student who is from Mount Royal University affect their color preference? So really here, I know the wording's not the best, but they're like, okay, well, it's not just age preference, it's specifically from students who are from Mount Royal University. So it still falls under how does age affect color preference, but it's kind of a sub adds to that knowledge base for that bigger question, and maybe like specifically for the locale they're at. They also did some quick background research of the demographics of MRU and Canadian sites. They want to gather some data in the beginning to maybe help decide how to set some stuff. They're not too confident on getting access to the data. It seemed to be hard to find, but they did find these current links. Things like, well, the 2018-2019 academic year, there were a total of 14,562 students, where 75.2% from Calgary and 1.8% international, and we have to see where's the rest of the demographics from that, and that definitely doesn't add up to 100%. So what's the other group? They found some statistics from some site talking just about enrollment over the years in millions across Canada for these institutions, so possible sampling. They're not sure. This doesn't talk about Alberta specifically, but it gives them a feel that there's a lot of students they could still pull from, not too small of a group. The same site, they find out things, the numbers of students enrolled in post-secondary institutions in 2018 by age and gender. So it's off by a couple of years, but they're like, okay, this at least gives them some stats for age. We don't know how this really is in Alberta and Mount Royal. It'd be nice to have stats specifically that talk about the population, but this gives a general feel that a lot of people going to university within this year that aging, like some less than 20, but a big chunk of them, we can see even just looking that there's a bigger cluster here, that a lot of people up to the age 24 and then going older. And so we need to make a deciding point of what will be considered one group. Like, how do we group them? Do we do this similar kind of age grouping here, or do we do like splitting it? And right now we know, like, well, if we have this as one group, this group, and this group, each one are not really the same in size, and that's kind of hard to compare them across. And maybe I give more bias if one group we sample way too much from, but we'll get into that later on for statistical reasoning stuff. And so we need to make a decision, but at least they have something to start looking at, and they have this graph to kind of start making decisions of what do they consider to be younger and older, and how will they split up their groups within their research and what they're doing. And so this will come later in the phase. And so now they get down to, okay, that's step 3 of constructing a hypothesis. They still don't feel super confident about this, but they know if they just go forwards and they go through the next steps of the scientific method, that they could probably refine and maybe come back and accept and reject their predictions here, and then based on what they learn is refine and innovate off of that to change up their actual predictions or get new ideas. And they're getting that innovation coming out as they learn, and what they're getting from the background research and what they get from that evidence, and growing from there. And so if they're going from the question of how does age of a student who is from Mount Royal University affect their color preference, and based on their background research, they think of a general kind of hypothesis and trying to keep with what we're doing in this course, something hypothesis then predictions. They're saying, well, older individuals' eyesight change over time, and they have had more life experience than younger individuals. This could cause older individuals to have a different color preference compared to the younger individuals. So we still have that cause and effect of age and color preference, but here they're kind of sticking to following what they learned from that first paper of saying, well, older individuals, so they're like, and will have a different color preference based on life experience and their sensations. So you can still see the cause and effect, but now it's specifically talking about, well, okay, this age group. Maybe it could be stated differently, but this is what they just felt like going forwards with. And then they make a prediction, keeping it to the if blank, then blank kind of statements, which is something that's testable. So if cause, then effect. And these make this testable because they're if-then statements. Either it is this or it's one or the other kind of thing. So here they're saying, if I ask an Emory student who is older than 21 their color preference, there will be a good chance that they have a different color preference compared to someone who is 21 years old or younger. And so this here is kind of a weird statement. They don't know how to make it perfect, but they have something if, and they're really just splitting it into groups. They're saying older is anyone who's older than 21, and 21 and under is anyone that's considered young. And the 21 for them is just kind of coming from, on this previous slide, that they saw, okay, there's a big clump here, and they're like, okay, well, if I take that most people starting university, if they're coming out straight and they're young and they're coming straight out of high school, probably roughly be 18. And if they spend just 4 years, they'll be graduating at 21. And so they're here, and even looking at the data, they kind of see, okay, well, 21 is here, so this could be considered the younger group, and this could be considered the older group, and they just kind of go with that. They don't have a lot of experience with stats and how to break that up yet, but they felt that was a good dividing point based upon what they had in that previous graph. And you can see them basically doing a quick kind of form of quantitative reasoning of the context of age, universities, having these statistic and these graphs, and then based upon what they're seeing here, of seeing these clumps and how much from the side, making a decision of how to actually split that. And they hope that it's okay. And so they're just seeing here, because maybe they'll find that there's not much difference, maybe from their first group to the next, that they kind of rank them same, and so they'd reject this. Or they'll find that there's maybe a difference and it's too small, so they reject it. Or they find that there's a really big difference and then they can accept it. And so they need to deal with that later on when they get into their statistical analysis. And so you can see at this whole point, after an hour of going through this, is that they've kind of dealt with what they feel they've done, like for the first steps of asking questions, doing background research, and constructing a hypothesis. They've gathered evidence to try to deal with the association between their cause and effect of age and color preference. And so their independent-dependent variable, which is part of the setting up that causal relationship. They feel that they've dealt with the direction of influence, and they'll state in their write-up that it's just free because of temporal kind of logical reasons that age has to come first, and so there's that direction. And they know next is their experimental design, that they need to do their experiment procedure or set up their methodology. They need to explain and do that in the beginning. They need to test to make sure it's kind of right in the background. Maybe they'll look at other papers and see how they've done and mimic them. Who knows? And once they feel they have it right, they'll go through gathering that data and then going to analyzing and drawing some conclusions from it using statistical reasoning, which is the next notes that we'll get through when you're gathering that data, and then finally coming to some conclusion and doing it. They also know they still need to deal with the non-spuriousness. They found some stuff from their background research that helps, but they need to dig deeper into that, and they know that also comes then generally from the experiment kind of procedure, experiment phase, and all the rest of this. That's what they feel they need to address that question. And that's what the future case studies, when we do this, like once we go through statistical reasoning and we go through scientific method 3, which will dig deeper into this kind of experiment procedure and give some more vocabulary related around the scientific method, we'll come back to this case study and we'll expand it. We'll let them grow and see where do they get from it and how do they analyze that data and come to those conclusions in the end. And this is something that you should get a little bit comfortable with, because when it comes up to things like later exams and possibly the final, you're going to have to look into how you deal, say, with the augmented reality, virtual reality, or whatever topic we're doing now. how would you start doing it? And you may feel at a loss, but just do what this student does, of just start doing some searches and reading some papers. And it may be confusing, but you'll get a few terms, you'll build up a few more things, your knowledge around it will become stronger, and then maybe your own curiosity will be like sparked for like looking into this technology in a different way and how you can innovate and using science as a possible way to step through this in some kind of modified procedure to help you learn from there. Well, as always, I hope you've enjoyed this and the new background and everything else. And I hope you do something good for yourself or someone else. If nothing else, just to laugh and take that into account. And remember that we have people around us that are going through different good times, bad times, hardships, and we don't always understand everything. And we may get angry at times and we don't know why. We may be happy. And we'll just grow and learn from that, just as we're learning through this procedure of how to help others and maybe how to make the world around us a better place and kind of connect in a different way with people. So take care of yourself and move on to the next notes. Or do something nice for yourself.